Fire Emblem Engage has been one of the most fun Fire Emblem games in recent history, in my opinion. It's been so much fun to play that I'm finding it hard to put down, to stop learning about it, and stop making content for it, which I guess is beneficial to you guys watching. My next step in the video making cycle, naturally, is exploring the positives and the negatives in Fire Emblem Engage. We're starting in this video with the positives, which is probably obvious by the title and why you clicked on this video, but I have to say it anyways. And this video is most likely going to be shorter than the inevitable criticisms in the next one because it's a lot easier to say that this is good and I like it than say this is bad and write an entire thesis on why that is. So having said that, obviously the next video will be talking about what Engage did wrong. And as usual, leaving a like on the video is very helpful, and honestly, I really love reading all the comments, so definitely let me know what your positive takeaways on Engage are down below. Also, I gotta do the YouTuber special and ask you to like and subscribe because that really does help me out a lot, and it's not a lie. Anyways, I'm gonna start with the most obvious thing about Engage, and that's the visuals. It's the first thing that you see, literally, and it's the first thing that you experience and start to formulate an opinion on. I think it's no secret that Fire Emblem Three Houses kinda struggled in the visual department. I mean, how can we forget the infamous textures on the fruit and vegetable stalls in Garreg Mach? But Engage seems to have had a lot of time to refine the way it looks and really polish the smoothness of the general aesthetic of the game. Keeping with the theme of visuals, I'm gonna sidestep into this next point and say that by far one of the best things they did was make animations great again. I've always been a huge fan of the animations in the GBA Fire Emblem games, which, by the way, if you haven't already, you should definitely try to play, I highly recommend them, but the animations in the GBA games were so much fun to watch. I've literally lost count of how many times I've said this on video, but the mercenary crit with the cheeky sword wag will never not be entertaining to me, as well as the general twirling around the lance or the axe before just heaving it into an enemy to destroy them and then nonchalantly pulling it back like it was no big deal. Engage doesn't really have anything funny like that, but what it lacks in creativity, it makes up for in the fluidity and gracefulness of the animations. Dodge animations are better than ever, and they change as you level your units up. The dodge and counter animation also differs from a normal attack animation and just shows how much love they really put into making this game look pretty. The last part I'm going to talk about in terms of visuals is the graphical fidelity. Now, this is a Switch game, so obviously don't expect anything too crazy, but what you can expect is consistency across the board. The only map I can recall having some frame drops or slowdowns on was Camilla's DLC Paralog map, but outside of that, I felt like the game ran quite well for me personally. I'm on a launch Switch that has had more than its fair share of mileage on it, and I wasn't hindered at all. Briefly following up on the visuals, I'm gonna cram one sentence in here to say that the musical remixes of some of the old Fire Emblem games are great, and leave it at that, because I think the rest of this take needs to be saved for the next video, and I've got a little bit of a rant on it. Moving on, let's talk about the absolute best part of Engage, which is the gameplay. I think they absolutely nailed it here. They added the break system, which is an interesting way of bringing back the weapon triangle without creating specific weapon advantage and disadvantage stat modifiers. Instead, in Engage, if you hit an enemy with a weapon that has the advantage, you instantly break them, and you don't allow them to counterattack, and you disable them for counterattacking for another round of combat following the current one. I actually think this feature is quite nice, and it definitely helps shake things up, especially since enemies can and will use this mechanic against you, which makes them feel a little bit more lethal, as well as forcing you to really think about where you're putting your units and how many rounds of combat they'll survive. Another part of the gameplay that I think a lot of us always talk about wanting done right is the map design. While a lot of the map objectives are still defeat boss or rout enemy, Engage does do a pretty good job of varying up a lot of the mechanics that you can find on the map itself. There are mechanics such as lava shooting out to do AoE damage, avalanches sweeping you away, new types of terrain, enemies popping out of houses randomly, changing water levels to decrease movement, and not to mention the ever-famous miasma. These are all things that help shake up the gameplay formula from just move forward and kill, and they really make you think twice about what you're doing and where you're positioned. In addition to that, things like smash weapons are now part of the game, which will physically move you to different tiles. Going hand in hand with map design is also enemy placement, and I've found that a lot of the enemy locations on maps has been quite clever. which disincentivizes end-turn enemy phase tanking between the break mechanic, the smash weapons, and just straight-up damage checks from weapons and follow-up attacks. I can't say how much I enjoy the fact that almost any mechanic that I can make use of, the enemies can make use of as well. This makes things feel like it's closer to an even playing field and that I'm not completely overpowered and just outmatching all the enemies. Speaking of overpowering enemies, let's talk about the bosses in Engage. Engage has finally managed to get bosses right in a Fire Emblem game. Time and time again, we've seen games where bosses end up just being a slightly stronger enemy unit with not much more than that going for them. Sure, they might have a unique model, some different skills, and fancy music, but that was about it really. In Engage, I feel like bosses are actually powerful now. In Chapter 5, the extra health bar mechanic gets introduced. This means that you need to kill the boss multiple times for them to actually go down, and in many instances, it's going to take you more than one unit attacking to take down a single health bar. Because of that, bosses actually feel like a challenge, and they're generally strong enough to kill one of your units if you're not careful with your positioning, or if you don't bring them all the way down in a single turn. Like I said earlier, this game also gives them skills and even emblem rings at times, so you need to watch out for things like engage attacks and skills hitting you left and right in order to get through these bosses. In addition to that, bosses also have some resistances depending on the difficulty you're playing on. I don't know what it's like on normal mode personally, but in hard mode, they have some resistance to effective damage and can still be broken. On maddening, they're completely immune to effective weapon damage and they can't be broken at all. This is a really great way of handling difficulty other than the arbitrary stat check increase, and I'm glad they were able to do it this way. Also, sometimes it's not just one boss on the map. Or 2. Or 4. 6? Yeah. They can get a bit crazy with the bosses sometimes, that's all I'm gonna say. Speaking of handling difficulty, and the fact that we just finished talking about how the bosses scale with difficulty, what about the other enemies? Well, on maddening, each enemy will gain a skill based on their class type that helps make them a bit tougher than their hard mode counterparts. Tying into map design, we also see the enemy placement on certain maps vary, as well as the increased number of enemies on the map that can cause you even more of a problem. Of course, I would be scamming you if I didn't say that the stat increase is not back. It is, and it seems to be about 3 to 4 points in average on every stat, but I haven't exactly gone through every enemy in the game to confirm that. It's just a rough estimate based on mid to late game observations. The Somniel is one thing that I also need to add to this video, because even though I still don't like hubs where you run around and waste a lot of time doing menial activities in order to min-max your playthrough, I think it did a great job in being a step in the right direction towards making the experience a lot more quick and compact. It also does an even better job of making sure that you're not really going through any FOMO if you skip the activities, as outside of dogs giving you ingots for forging and eating for temporary boosts in battle, you can skip everything else and you will not be behind others or missing out on anything important in any capacity, and I think that's fantastic. Seriously, with the on-map gameplay of Engage being so fun, I wanted to spend as little time as possible going through the stupid loading screens in the Somniel, so I'm very glad to just be able to skip when I want to. One specific aspect about the Somniel that I want to talk about is the Forge. Putting aside that you can't forge from the pre-battle menu because that's really annoying, the Forge is another aspect of Engage that I really enjoy because it allows you to take your allies to a completely different level of power, and it has a bit of an element of customizability to it. There are multiple parts of the Forge, the refining part and the engraving part. Refining costs ingots and money, and you can either choose to level up your weapon into a higher version of itself to increase various stats such as its might, hit rate, and crit, or even change it to a completely different weapon altogether by upgrading it to the next tier using materials. This is awesome because it grants you access to things you wouldn't normally have that early in the game unless you completely focus your resources on a single weapon, and it could really change the viability of certain units or even just the way your next playthrough plays out. The engrave system is also something I really like. This allows you to add on effects to your weapon of choice in exchange for bond points as long as you have the emblem ring in question that matches the engrave. Like refining, this lets you swing your stats on a certain weapon in a specific direction, but these are far more balanced and will have drawbacks such as crit increasing engraves generally reducing weight, strength increasing engraves generally increasing weight, and stuff like that. You might find some specialized engraves here as well, but as a general rule of thumb, they have an element of balance to them to prevent things from being completely broken. This also lets you further specialize your weapons, like that Thoron tome that isn't allowed to double based on how the game works. Why not just increase its strength and weight anyways, because it's not like you need the speed and it's not gonna matter regardless. In the end, this is just my 3 pages of what I like in Engage, and odds are, if it's something you didn't see here, it's probably gonna be in the negatives video, but let me know in the comments what some of the stuff you loved about Engage are, and just in case there's something I forgot to mention, you can post it below and I'll confirm it with a little love button that the channel allows me to do. And just like that, we're all done with this video, and I'll see you all in the next one where we'll talk Gloom and Doom. Peace.